What is going on today, guys? My name is Tomcat, and welcome to a brand new episode of Stock vs. Tuned in Forza Horizon 4. Now, this episode is going to be another highly requested episode, and that is going to be the Ford Focus RSRX against a Ford Fiesta ST. Now, obviously, the RSRX is going to be the stock one, and the Fiesta ST is going to be the tuned one. Now, before we get any further along in this video, I do want to go ahead and actually apologize for the fact that my voice is a little bit scratchy right now, but hopefully we can look past that and get through the rest of the video. Now, it is kind of interesting for me to note that this is one of the very first Stock vs. Tuned episodes. It might actually be the very first one where it's been a race car against a street car, because I very, very rarely use actual race cars for this series, and I'm not sure why that is. I've generally kind of stayed away from using track-only race cars in this series, but using that RSRX actually opens this up to a lot more options, because there are race cars available to us that I just don't end up using, and I think that there's a lot to actually be said for a race car against a street car, and I think it adds a cool new element to it. Now, driving the RSRX, I mean, this thing is wild. It's absolutely crazy, and especially with a wheel. I mean, I had a couple options on how I could set up the shifting, and for this one, I actually decided to use the paddle shifts, because I just wanted to keep my hands on the wheel. It's so fast. It's so like, there's so much information coming at you at once with this car that I was like, yeah, I just want to keep my hands on the wheel and use the paddles. And also because in real life, you would be shifting this car sequentially anyway, whether that would be with a sequential shifter or with paddles. You could do it literally either way. But the sound of it is just insane. However, driving up to the roundabout, I noticed what I was pretty sure was going to be not necessarily a fatal flaw, but a pretty big flaw in this car's just design in general, and that is the fact that it's crazy off the line and it's got insane grip, but it runs out of gearing really, really fast. And because this is stock versus tuned, I wasn't gonna mess with the gearing of this car because it was stock. I mean, if it runs out of gearing, that's on the car. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's the car's problem. Like, if it loses because it runs out of gearing, that's on the car. And, you know, again, it was a requested car, so we'll see what happens. But literally, we get right up to 142 miles an hour, 143 miles an hour, and then we stay there because of a gearing limitation. This car was not built to go fast in a straight line down a highway. It just wasn't. Now, with some slightly different gearing, I think that could be helped. But again, stock versus tuned, so we have to leave this thing alone. Now, I would love to mess with it and change up that gearing a little bit and see what it would be capable of. But even then, I think using this car for highway stuff would kind of be missing the point. You know what I mean? It's just not made for that. It's made to do what we're doing right now, among lots of other Hoonigan-related things. Now, the little Fiesta ST, especially driving this thing stock, was such an insane change of pace. Like, it was like going from, driving like a shifter cart down to like an electric like indoor cart. If you want to think about it in like go-karting terms, that's the way I would describe it. I don't know how many of you guys are into go-karting, but if I had anything to relate it to, it would be that. So obviously you could see that we changed it back to manual with clutch, because that's just how this, the Fiesta ST should be driven. I mean, as far as I know, you can only get a Fiesta ST in a manual, which is, I mean, why would you want a Fiesta ST in anything other than a manual anyway? I mean, a Fiesta ST in an automatic would just be so, like, wrong. You have to have the manual to enjoy a Fiesta ST. Now, am I some sort of manual elitist that thinks everything needs to have a manual? No. I mean, like, something like a Ferrari 488, that should have a dual clutch. Even a Lamborghini Huracan, that should have a dual clutch. You know, a lot of these modern supercars, like all the Porsches, yes, they should all have dual clutches because they are so fast that a dual clutch doesn't detract from the experience, but it enhances the experience, in my opinion. However, cars like, say, a Viper, that should have a manual, you know? So it just depends on... It depends on the car that you're driving. It depends on the car at hand. Like a Miata should have a freaking manual, just like a Fiesta ST. But setting off in the Fiesta ST, I didn't really want to do any sort of complex launch procedure or anything. I was like, you know what? We're just going to go for it. I mean, because there's not really going to be that much to be had from trying to figure out some sort of, like, complicated launch procedure. Like, instead of just, like, nailing it off the line. And so that's what we did. It really does feel, though, like when you drive this car with the shifter, it feels like it was meant to be driven with it. I will say, though, you have to shift it really slow, otherwise the game will yell at you. If you don't shift it slowly, the game will basically hang revs, and tell you that it'll basically say, oh, you're shifting incorrectly, when you're not actually shifting incorrectly. But we did about 125, which was pretty good for this thing stock, and it gave me a lot of hope that once we tuned this thing, we were going to take down the RSRX. So once we got back to the shop, you guys will be happy to know that we did not put the Turbo Rally engine in it, because I know that at this point, you guys are not fans of the Turbo Rally engine. I'm not either. The Turbo Rally engine, yeah, it's overused, but it's kind of the only option for a lot of cars, and there's certain cars that in order to be competitive, they literally require you to swap that engine in. Now, this car, I decided to stick with the stock EcoBoost and build the crap out of it instead of put the Turbo Rally engine in it, because I felt like, again, putting the Turbo Rally engine in it just felt like it was just like, I looked at the Turbo Rally engine and I was like, ugh, again? You know what I mean? Like, and I feel like that's the same opinion that a lot of you guys have, because in a lot of my previous videos, you made that opinion very clear that you didn't want to see the Turbo Rally engine anymore, and I completely understand that. I don't want to see the Turbo Rally engine anymore either. The problem with the Turbo Rally engine is that there are some cars where the stock engine has like no potential at all, and your only swap option is the Turbo Rally engine. I mean, that's just the cars where that's the case. It's just kind of an unfortunate thing where it's like, well, we're gonna have to use that engine. But thankfully, this engine actually had some decent potential in it. So once we fully built everything out, we came out to, you know, like we got decent numbers. You know what I mean? Like decent numbers for a little EcoBoost. And I figured that while I was here, I might as well go ahead and upgrade the entire driveline. Like, it would be... I feel like it would just be dumb to put all that power through it and then not allow myself to have the adjustability. And I went back and forth on whether or not doing aero was a good idea. And I eventually kind of settled on the idea of, like, yes, of course aero is a good idea. Why are we debating on whether or not aero is a good idea? I also decided to leave it front wheel drive because I felt like that would be a lot more... I felt like that would be a lot more true to the spirit of this car, because really it's that sort of like front wheel drive icon, and I feel like if you take that away, then it just sort of becomes weird. It sort of becomes like just not the same thing anymore. And when I say like not the same thing anymore, I don't necessarily mean that in the way of like the car being ruined, but it's not necessarily true to the spirit of what the car is. So I wanted to mess with the gearing just a little bit. I wanted to mess with the tuning just a little bit. I didn't want to do anything too drastic, because I figured I didn't want to screw the car up too much. And I wanted to be able to use it for different things. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and take this thing out to the highway and see what it can do up against that RSRX and see what kind of speed it can post. So here we are in our tuned Fiesta ST, which I'm going to tell you right now, before we even start driving, this car's a blast. It's hilarious to drive with a wheel and shifter. Now, the last time I built a modified Fiesta ST, and, you know, I should probably stop parking there because I got hit the last time I parked there too, but the last time I built a modified Fiesta ST on this show, I drove it with the controller, and it was fun, but, oh, dude, There are some cars that are just so much more fun to drive with a wheel, and this is one of them. It's so hilarious to drive. I mean, you can get so in tune with all of the hilarious stuff that the car does, whether it be the lift-off oversteer when you turn into a corner, or just the feeling of the torque whenever you shift it and you actually, get that little turbo shove. It's really, really fun. Really fun. It wouldn't do as much lift-off oversteer now as it used to stock, just because I think, after adding the race suspension and the wider, stickier tires, it was a little bit trickier to get the car to rotate just because the whole setup was grippier, which I understand. It makes complete and total sense. But the downforce was supposed to help with grip, and it did, but only after you got out of the first 3 gears. This thing will spin first through third if you bank shift it. Now, if you drive it carefully, then you could probably get some traction in second gear, but oh my god, if you bank shift it, yeah, you're going to end up with a lot of wheel spin. But we ended up posting a speed of 163 miles an hour, so we did beat the RSRX. And again, the RSRX had a big limitation with its gearing, and I personally believe that if we had modified the RSRX's gearing, that it would have definitely been a much closer fight. I don't know if the RSRX would have beat it, but it would have definitely, like I said, it would have definitely been a closer fight. But again, stock versus tune. Can't modify anything on the opposing stock car, so that's just kind of the way it is sometimes. But if you guys have any suggestions for stock versus tuned episodes that you want to see, make sure to leave them in the comments below. Subscribe and hit that notification bell if you're new, and I will see you guys next time. Talk to you all later.